An arrogant HOA president destroyed my chicken coop fence while I was having coffee. When I saw my 50 prize-winning chickens in danger, something snapped inside me. The immaculate clubhouse lawn became the stage for an invasion no one will forget. Feathers, cackling, and the panic of the allergic HOA president turned the monthly meeting into unforgettable chaos, a story of revenge, justice, and determined birds that will change your view of HOAs forever. Leave a like and comment. What would you have done in my place? Have you ever wondered what happens when a 63-year-old retired lawyer loses her patience? Well, my dears, it's not a pretty sight, especially when that lawyer, me in this case, has 50 pedigree chickens and a stuck-up HOA president trying to act like she owns the place. Brace yourselves, because this story goes from morning coffee to coop chaos, complete with feathers flying everywhere. It was a peaceful Sunday morning. I was on my patio, enjoying my warm coffee, dressed in the flowery housecoat my granddaughters gave me, when I heard the infernal noise of machinery. Nothing like having your peace shattered first thing in the morning, right? I ran to see what was happening and nearly had a heart attack. Brenda, our illustrious HOA president of Willow Creek Estates, was there in all her glory, with a smirk, phonier than a $3 bill, supervising a crew of workers mercilessly tearing down my chicken coop fence. "What on earth do you think you're doing?" I yelled from the window, still holding my coffee cup, which almost went flying from the shock. 40 years practicing law for the biggest names in the state, and now, in my retirement, I have to put up with some middle-aged busybody invading my property. Oh no, this wasn't going to stand. "Just improving the visual appeal of our community, Eleanor," she replied in that shrill voice that got on my nerves. "This fence and those birds are lowering our property values. The board decided they have to go." What board? What decision? I attended every single HOA meeting, mostly because it was the only entertainment we had around here besides the Wednesday night bingo. And never ever had anything been discussed about my chicken coop. In fact, everyone loved my farm fresh eggs. Josephine from Building 3 only used them for her famous pound cakes. Tony at the gatehouse took a dozen home to his wife every week. Even that witch Brenda's grandson came to feed my girls on Sundays. I hurried down the stairs faster than my knees usually allowed, ignoring the twinges in my hip my orthopedist always warned me about. When I reached the backyard, half the fence was already down, and my chickens, Gertrude, Matilda, Odette, and all the others, each named after a great woman I admired throughout my life, were cackling desperately, not understanding what was happening. "You have no authority to do this," I yelled, planting myself in front of the worker holding a sledgehammer. "This is trespassing, destruction of private property, and disturbing the peace. I can cite at least 15 articles in the bylaws you're violating right now." Brenda just rolled her eyes, adjusted that artificial platinum blonde hair that looked like a tacky wig, and made a dismissive gesture with her ring-laden hands. "Dear, I'm the HOA president. I decide what's best for the community, and these birds are an aesthetic and sanitary problem. Besides, the regulations prohibit farm animals." "What regulations? The same ones that say no construction work on Sundays, or the ones requiring assembly approval for any structural modifications?" I retorted, feeling my blood boil. "You know that moment when you feel your pressure rise and almost see red? Yep. 63 years of life, 40 of them practicing law, facing grumpy judges and arrogant prosecutors, and now I had to deal with an HOA president who probably didn't know the difference between habeas corpus and a ham sandwich. While we argued, my chickens took advantage of the downed fence and started to escape. First was Simone, my most mischievous barred Plymouth Rock. Then Cecilia, a black guinea hen with more personality than many humans I know. Within minutes, chaos erupted. Chickens running everywhere, Brenda screaming as if the apocalypse had arrived, the workers trying unsuccessfully to capture the fugitives. And then, my friends, came the epiphany. As I watched the pandemonium, an idea began to form in my mind. A deliciously wicked idea, the kind only a mind trained in finding legal loopholes could conceive. If Brenda thought my chickens were an aesthetic problem, maybe she should get to know them better, much better. Instead of chasing after my birds, I calmly went back inside, picked up my phone and dialed my old friend Gerald, who had been a court clerk and was now my dominoes partner on Thursday afternoons. "Gerald, I need you to research something for me urgently. I want the HOA bylaws in full, especially the part about board meetings and approval of works. In the following days, I gathered my chickens with the help of some neighbors who sided with me. I set up a temporary enclosure in the backyard, but it was no life. For my girls, they were used to space to quality. I had pedigree chickens, Orpington, Plymouth Rock, Sussex, Brahma, each worth more than that polyester pantsuit Brenda wore to the HOA meetings. Revenge, they say, is a dish best served cold. But honestly, I've always preferred my dishes piping hot like the stubborn old bird I am. So I didn't wait long to act. That same week, there was a monthly residents' meeting, followed by a charity luncheon organized by Brenda herself to raise funds for a renovation of the clubhouse party room. A renovation nobody had asked for, by the way. That morning, I woke up early, fed my girls some special corn I'd bought at the farmer's market, gave them fresh water, and talked to each of them, explaining the plan. You might be laughing, thinking I'm a crazy old lady who talks to chickens, and maybe I am. But after living alone for 15 years since my Anthony passed away, these chickens were my company, my family. Each had a name, a personality, a story. Clarice, for example, was a skittish hen who only approached me. Ruth, a majestic golden Orpington, laid the most delicious eggs you've ever tasted. At 3 in the afternoon, just as the meeting was about to start, I put my plan into action. With the help of John, the gardener who secretly had a crush on me for decades, I'm not blind, dears, we transported the 50 chickens in large, covered cages near the clubhouse. The plan was simple. At the right moment, during the meeting, when Brenda was at the peak of her speech about enhancing property values, or whatever nonsense she invented, to justify tearing down my fence, we would release the chickens. Everything was going according to plan. From a side window, I could see the meeting in progress. Brenda gestured enthusiastically, pointing to slides with charts that probably meant nothing. The ladies from the charity luncheon, all uniformed in their pastel suits and pearls, nodded like bobbleheads on a dashboard. I gave John the signal. In a matter of seconds, the doors were opened, and my 50 chickens invaded the room like a feathered army thirsty for justice. Oh, the chaos. The beautiful confusion. I never thought I'd see something so glorious in my 63 years of life. Cecilia, my most daring guinea hen, flew straight onto the main table, knocking over the water pitcher onto Brenda's papers. Simone and Ruth started, pecking at the knockoff Chanel purses the luncheon ladies were so proud of. Yes, I knew they were fake. We go through Miami once a year, dears. We know how to spot the real thing. Margaret, my giant Brahma hen, stood majestically in the center of the room, as if presiding over a new assembly. But the real spectacle was Brenda. Apparently, our HOA president had a little secret she didn't share with anyone. She was violently allergic to feathers. Within seconds, her face swelled up like a balloon. She started sneezing uncontrollably, and her expensive mascara ran down her Botox-filled cheeks in black streaks. "Ah, achoo! Get these! Ah, achoo! These creatures! Ah, achoo! Out of here!" she shrieked between sneezes, while unsuccessfully trying to climb onto a chair to escape my girls who, I must confess, seemed particularly interested in chasing her. Animals are intuitive, they say. They sense who doesn't like them. I watched for a few minutes, relishing the scene. The ladies ran back and forth, screaming as if they were in a horror movie. The few men present tried unsuccessfully to catch the chickens, who proved surprisingly skilled at dodging desperate hands. The community security guards, paid to handle emergencies, clearly hadn't been trained for a chicken invasion scenario. Finally, I decided to make my entrance. I walked through the main door like a queen, strolling slowly, wearing my best light blue linen outfit and the real pearl necklace I inherited from my grandmother. I stopped in the middle of the room, cleared my throat, and, in my best courtroom, a voice said, "Good afternoon, neighbors. I see you're getting acquainted with my chickens." Since the HOA president decided, without consulting the assembly and violating several articles of our own bylaws, that they could no longer have their private space, I thought it only fair to bring them to a more social environment. Total silence. Even the chickens seemed to pause to listen. These are my girls. 50 pedigree chickens, each worth more than a month's HOA fees. They produce the eggs you all enjoy so much in Josephine's pound cakes, in the Sunday brunch quiches, in the skin, creams Dr. Carmen recommends. Did you know they paid for my youngest granddaughter's college tuition? Now they're homeless because our HOA president decided that a well-maintained, painted and flowery fence was lowering our property values. Brenda tried to speak, but was interrupted by another violent sneeze. I seized the opportunity. While you decide what to do about this problem that apparently no one knew existed until last week, I'll let my girls enjoy the community garden. After all, if they can't have their own space, they should enjoy the common area that my HOA fees also help maintain. With that, I exited as majestically as I had entered, leaving behind the feathered chaos and a Brenda red with rage and allergies. This was just the first battle in a war that would last 9 long months. 9 months of strategies, twists, unexpected alliances, and eventually a resolution none of us could have imagined at the beginning. In the days following the Great Chicken Invasion, as it became known in the community, Brenda counterattacked. First, she banned the sale of my eggs among residents, a 15-year tradition that supplemented my retirement funds. Then she placed security guards to patrol my house, supposedly to ensure the birds remained within the designated perimeter. As if my chickens were high-security criminals. This was my first major obstacle. Without the egg income, how would I maintain the specialized care for my chickens? Petunia, my speckled Sussex, needed special feed due to a digestive issue. Virginia, a majestic white Plymouth Rock, was under vet treatment for a foot infection. 50 pedigree chickens don't survive on scraps, but I didn't get to 63 by being easily defeated. If Brenda wanted to play dirty, I could show her how a retired lawyer with free time and many contacts played the game. My first move was to call my former intern, now a brilliant lawyer specializing in HOA law. Helen, dear, I need you to dig up all the cases of HOA president power abuse in the state for the last 10 years. And I also want to know exactly what the limits of an HOA president's authority are without prior board consultation. While Helen worked on the legal side, I started cultivating alliances within the community. Josephine, the best baker in building 3, was furious because her pound cakes, famous throughout the area, just weren't the same with store-bought eggs. It's outrageous, Eleanor. 30 years making the same cake and now it tastes like I'm baking cardboard. Josephine organized a petition demanding the immediate return of my egg sales. To my surprise, over 80% of the residents signed. Apparently, it wasn't just Josephine who depended on my farm fresh eggs. Margaret used them for her homemade facial masks. Albert swore they were the only ones that didn't give him heartburn. And even young Trish, that fitness buff from Building 5, bought 2 dozen a week for her protein omelets. Meanwhile, poor John, the love-struck gardener, had his own problems. Brenda found out he had helped me with the attack and threatened to fire him. What she didn't know was that John was protected by labor laws older than the community itself, and that I had all the necessary documents to ensure he received a severance package capable of buying a small farm if he were unjustly fired. Eleanor, he told me one afternoon while pretending to prune the rose bushes near my window so we could talk, Brenda's losing it. Yesterday I saw her talking to some men in suits in the back garden near where your coop was. They were measuring everything, taking pictures. That set off alarm bells in my head. What was Brenda planning? That's when I decided I needed inside information. And who better to get it than my granddaughter Megan, a journalism student and master at getting people to talk more than they should. The following weekend, Megan showed up for Sunday lunch, something she rarely did, busy with her internships and college parties. But Grandma's plea for help was too strong to ignore. "Grandma, are you sure you want to do this? It sounds like a plot from a soap opera." She laughed, helping me feed the chickens in our makeshift coop in the backyard. "Megan, my flower, your grandmother spent 40 years cracking cases much more complicated than this. I just want you to use your journalistic charm to find out what that platinum blonde is plotting." And so Megan infiltrated as a volunteer on the committee for the next HOA charity event, a bingo night whose funds would go towards a landscaping revitalization nobody had asked for. In less than a week, she returned with precious information. "Grandma, you won't believe this. The HOA president is negotiating with Horizon Development Corp to sell part of the green space where your coop used to be." They want to build a new apartment tower, and she'd receive a consulting fee. Bingo. It wasn't about aesthetics. It wasn't about regulations. It wasn't about public health. It was about money, as always. Brenda wanted to sell off a piece of the community, which belonged to all homeowners, for her own benefit. With this information in hand, I began preparing my masterstroke. I needed concrete proof and the perfect moment to expose Brenda. That's when fate decided to lend a hand. At the beginning of the third month of this silent war, we had a special meeting to discuss the so-called landscaping revitalization. Brenda was in her element, presenting slides full of images of sophisticated gardens, ornamental fountains, and an absurd meditation space that no one over 40 would ever use. When it was time for questions, I politely raised my hand. Brenda visibly hesitated before giving me the floor, but she couldn't ignore me in front of everyone. Brenda, before we vote on any renovations, I'd like to better understand why my chicken coop fence was torn down without prior assembly approval, given that Article 23 of our bylaws clearly states that any alteration to private areas visually impacting the community must be approved in assembly by at least a 2/3 vote. An awkward silence fell. Brenda cleared her throat. As I explained earlier, that was an urgent matter of public health and community aesthetics that... And also, I interrupted, smiling sweetly, I'd like to know why you've been meeting with representatives from Horizon Development Corp. to discuss selling part of our green space without informing the board, given that Article 45 states that any negotiation involving common areas requires unanimous approval from homeowners. Brenda's face went white as a sheet. The board members looked at each other, confused. Clearly they knew nothing about this negotiation. I don't know what you're talking about. Brenda tried to deflect, but her voice faltered. That's when my granddaughter Megan, strategically seated at the back of the room, raised her hand. If I may, I have copies of emails exchanged between Brenda and the sales director of Horizon Development Corp., dated within the last 3 weeks, specifically discussing the sale of a 20,000 square foot area in the southern part of the community, exactly where my grandmother's chicken coop was, for $1 million with a 15% finder's fee for the HOA President. Total chaos. Residents started talking all at once. The gentleman who played dominoes every afternoon under the century-old oak trees that would be felled for the new construction stood up indignantly. Josephine started crying, thinking about the end of her prize-winning cakes. Albert, the retired accountant on the board, demanded to see the documents. Brenda tried to defend herself, but every word sank her deeper. That's when Judge Clarence, the oldest resident in the community and a respected retired judge, asked for the floor. In 50 years living in Willow Creek Estates, I have never seen such a breach of trust. I propose the immediate suspension of Brenda from the position of HOA President and the formation of a temporary committee to investigate these allegations. The vote was almost unanimous. Only Brenda's 3 inseparable friends, who coincidentally had recently received apartment renovations without anyone understanding how they afforded them, voted against it. I should have been ecstatic with the victory. But to be honest, I felt a twinge of pity for Brenda at that moment. She looked so small leaving the room, shoulders slumped, face red with shame. In that instant, I remembered my late husband's words. Eleanor, the best victory isn't the one that destroys the enemy, but the one that turns them into a friend. But well, I wasn't quite ready for that level of altruism yet. My chickens still didn't have a proper coop after all. In the following weeks, the community entered a period of tense calm. A provisional committee took over from Brenda, led by Dr. Carmen, a retired physician who had a knack for making everything seem simpler than it really was. My chicken coop began to be rebuilt, this time with an architectural design approved by the assembly, making it a sort of community attraction. Children could visit, learn about the chickens, and even help collect eggs on weekends. Brenda, meanwhile, remained secluded in her apartment. The rumor mill, read Josephine and her circle of informants, said she was suing the development company for misleading her. Others insisted she was planning to move. Honestly, I didn't much care. I was too busy reorganizing my small farm fresh egg business, which now even had a waiting list. That's when fate, that unpredictable scriptwriter, decided to add another twist to our story. The weather forecast announced the worst storm in 50 years for our region. The warning was severe: winds over 60 mph, torrential rains, possible flooding. Our community, located in a valley, not coincidentally named Willow Creek, was particularly vulnerable. My chicken coop was still under construction, with only the foundation and part of the structure completed. There was no way to adequately protect my girls from a storm of that magnitude. I started to panic. 50 chickens, many elderly like me, some with health problems, wouldn't survive if left, exposed to those conditions. I tried to improvise a solution. Maybe I could move them into my garage, but it was too small. I thought about asking neighbors for help, distributing a few chickens to each house, but many were traveling, fleeing the storm. John offered his tool shed, but it was old and leaked everywhere. On the eve of the storm, when I was almost resigned to losing some of my dear companions, someone knocked on my door. It was almost night, and I wasn't expecting visitors. When I opened it, I nearly fell backward in surprise. Brenda stood there on my doorstep, without the exaggerated makeup, without the high heels, without the Queen of the Manor pose. She looked smaller, older, more human. "Eleanor," she began, her voice devoid of its usual authoritarian tone, "I heard about your problem with the chickens and the storm." I remained silent, waiting for the other shoe to drop. Was she here to gloat, to celebrate my misfortune? The clubhouse party room is vacant since we started planning the renovation that's now cancelled. It's spacious, enclosed, safe. Your birds could stay there during the storm. I must have looked utterly suspicious, because she quickly added, "I know I have no right to ask for your trust. I know I messed up badly. But I'm not a monster, Eleanor. I don't want to see animals suffer if I can prevent it." I stood silent for a few moments, weighing my options. Trusting Brenda seemed crazy, but what did I have to lose? If it was a trap, at worst, I'd still be in the same desperate situation. "Why are you doing this?" I finally asked. She sighed, deeply. "Because I need to fix some things in my life, and maybe helping your chickens is a start." Still wary, I accepted her offer. That same night, with the help of a few neighbors and the faithful John, we transported all 50 of my chickens to the clubhouse party room. We improvised a roost with tables and chairs, spread hay on the floor, set up feeders and waterers. It wasn't ideal, but it was safe. The storm hit with fury the next morning. Howling winds, rain like I'd never seen, deafening thunder. I spent a sleepless night worrying about my girls. Early in the morning, despite the rain still falling, I decided to go to the clubhouse to check on them. To my surprise, when I got there, I found Brenda. She had spent the entire night in the room, sleeping on a makeshift mat, to make sure everything went well with the chickens. She looked exhausted, disheveled, with deep, dark circles under her eyes, a far cry from the impeccable HOA President. Everyone knew. "They got agitated during the night with the thunder," she explained, gently stroking Simone, my barred Plymouth Rock, who surprisingly seemed comfortable in her lap. "So I thought it best to stay here. This one especially wouldn't stop making noise." "That's Simone," I explained. "She's always been the most fearful." "Simone." Brenda smiled slightly. "My grandmother's name was Simone. She was a formidable woman, raised chickens too on the farm where I spent my childhood. And so, during the 3 days the storm lasted, I witnessed one of the most unexpected transformations of my life. Brenda developed a special affection for Simone and gradually began to learn the names and personalities of each of my chickens. We talked for hours, initially about the birds, then about more personal matters. "You know, Eleanor," she confessed on the third day, as we shared coffee in the unlikely living room we'd created in a corner of the party room, "I've always hated this community." I almost choked on my coffee. "What do you mean? You've been the HOA president for 8 years. "Exactly. My husband bought this condo because it was the right address, the place where people like us should live. When he passed away 5 years ago, I wanted to sell and move back to the countryside, to a house with a yard like the one from my childhood. But everyone said it would be a mistake, that I'd throw away the status, the investment. So I clung to the HOA presidency to justify staying here, to feel important in a place where I never felt at home. That confession changed everything between us. Suddenly, Brenda was no longer the villain of the story, just a woman trapped in a life she didn't choose, trying to find purpose and meaning in the wrong way. When the storm finally passed, Brenda helped me move the chickens back home. The coop was ruined, of course, but my house had held up well. We improvised a space in my backyard while discussing ideas for a new project. What if we did something more integrated with the community landscaping? Brenda suggested, surprising me with the "we-mer" as if it were now a joint project. Something beautiful that could be educational for the children and still productive for you. It was the beginning of an unlikely partnership. In the following weeks, Brenda and I worked together on a project that would transform not only my chicken coop, but the entire community. Willow Creek Estates, which had always been a pretty place but somewhat lifeless, would gain a new heart. But fate still had one last surprise in store for us. In early spring, when our project was well underway, I received an unexpected call. It was Helen, my former intern turned lawyer. "Eleanor, I have news. Horizon Development Corp completely backed out of the deal. They discovered the soil in that area has heavy metal contamination from an old factory that operated there before. The community was built. Any construction would require extremely expensive decontamination." I laughed so hard I almost fell off my chair. The universe has a peculiar sense of humor. Brenda had nearly lost everything: reputation, position, friends, over a piece of land worth less than the paper the contract would have been signed on. When I told Brenda the news, I expected to see disappointment on her face. Instead, she looked relieved. "Thank God," she exclaimed. "Now we can move forward without that." Cloud hanging over our heads. But there was another problem. The committee investigating Brenda's actions was finalizing its report, and things didn't look good for her. Besides the attempted illegal land sale, they discovered other irregularities in her management. Not fraud or embezzlement, but decisions made without consulting the board, expenses not approved by the assembly, minor abuses of power. That's when Brenda made a decision that surprised me. One afternoon, while helping put the chickens into the partially built new coop, she said simply, "I'm going to need your help, Eleanor. I want to confess everything at the next assembly, own up to my mistakes, apologize, and propose a way to compensate the community." I was surprised not only by the decision but by the request. "And how can I help you with that? You were a lawyer for 40 years. I want you to help me prepare my defense, not to escape the consequences, but to face them the right way." And so, in one of the most unexpected twists of this story, I became the legal consultant for the woman who had torn down my chicken coop months earlier. We spent evenings working together in her dining room, reviewing documents, preparing a detailed report of all the questionable decisions she had made, drafting a compensation proposal that included returning part of her stipend as president, and dedicating volunteer hours to the community. At the assembly, Brenda surprised everyone with her honesty and humility. She confessed her mistakes, offered sincere apologies, explained her motivations without using them as excuses, and presented her reparation proposal. Some residents still wanted blood, of course, but most were touched by her gesture. "I propose," said Dr. Carmen, the interim president, "that we accept Brenda's apologies and proposal, with two conditions. First, that she cannot run for HOA president for the next 2 years. Second, that her volunteer hours be dedicated to the new community project being developed in partnership with Eleanor." The proposal passed almost unanimously, and so what began as a war between two stubborn women transformed into a partnership that would benefit the entire community. In the following months, Willow Creek Estates was completely transformed. The old space of my coop was expanded to include a community garden and a composting system. My 50 chickens got a palace, a spacious, beautiful, and functional coop with scheduled visits for children from the community and even local schools. Brenda, fulfilling her volunteer hours, discovered a talent for gardening she never knew she had. Under the guidance of John, who finally worked up the courage to ask her out for coffee, she helped create organic flower beds that attracted butterflies and hummingbirds, turning the community into the true Willow Creek its name promised. I, in turn, coordinated a program where my gentlest chickens visited the community's oldest and loneliest residents weekly. Seeing the smile on the face of Tony from the gatehouse, now widowed and with reduced mobility, when Cecilia calmly perched on his lap, was one of the greatest joys of my week. The climax of this transformation occurred at the community's annual summer fair, exactly 9 months after this whole story began. As part of the celebrations, we organized a contest for dishes made with farm-fresh eggs. The competition was fierce. Josephine with her traditional pound cake, young Paul with a quiche Lorraine, Margaret with a savory pie that was her specialty. To everyone's surprise, Brenda also entered. No one knew she cooked, as she had only ever been seen in her role as the authoritarian HOA president. When it was time for tasting, she presented a cheesecake following her grandmother's traditional recipe, using exclusively eggs from my chickens. A respectful silence fell over the judges' table, composed of the residents themselves, as they tasted the cheesecake. It melted in the mouth. The crust was light as a cloud. The aroma could take anyone back to childhood. When she was announced as the winner, Brenda was visibly emotional. With teary eyes, she gave a brief speech I'll never forget. This cheesecake was my grandmother Simone's specialty. Every time I spent vacations on her farm, she made this cheesecake on Sunday morning. The secret, she said, was in the farm-fresh eggs from the chickens she raised with such care. For years, since I moved to the city, I tried unsuccessfully to recreate this cheesecake. Store-bought eggs just didn't work. When I first tasted the eggs from Eleanor's chickens, I cried like a child because I finally tasted that flavor from my childhood again. She paused, discreetly wiping away a tear. I want to confess something to all of you. My issue with Eleanor's chicken coop was never really about aesthetics or property values. It was about fear. Fear of change. Fear of abandoning the artificial life I had built. Fear of admitting I was deeply unhappy trying to be someone I wasn't. Looking back, I realized what truly bothered me was seeing someone living authentically, without caring about appearances or status. Everything I was pretending to value. The silence was absolute. Brenda continued, stronger now. I thank Eleanor, not only for the eggs that reconnected me with my roots, but for being unintentionally the catalyst for the biggest transformation in my life. Sometimes we need to lose something to find what truly matters. Thank you all for the second chance. The applause was deafening. Even my chickens, watching the scene from their new elegant coop near the party area, seemed to cackle in approval. And so, dear friends, I conclude this story that began with a demolished fence and 50 rebellious chickens invading an HOA meeting. Today, almost a year after that fateful Sunday, Brenda and I are often seen in the rocking chairs on the porch of the community center, a project we designed together, watching my chickens peck freely around the revitalized garden. Sometimes, between one game of dominoes and another, we look at each other and laugh, remembering the chaos, the accusations, the private war we waged. Who would have thought that two stubborn middle-aged ladies would find not only peace, but a true friendship after such a confrontation? As I always tell my granddaughters when they recount their teenage dramas, life's apparent defeats sometimes lead us to victories we never even knew we needed. My fence was torn down, yes, and with it, invisible walls that separated people. Stories and possibilities also fell. In the end, I didn't just get my chicken coop back, I gained an entire community. And my chickens? Well, they continue to lay the best farm-fresh eggs around, thank you for asking. Simone, in particular, now has a special bond with Brenda, to my perpetual surprise and amusement. Every morning, she's the first to appear when Brenda comes, to bring the special corn she buys at the farmer's market. Who knew chickens also give second chances? So the next time some self-proclaimed authority tries to tear down your fences, remember my story. Sometimes unleashing 50 chickens in the middle of a meeting might just be the beginning of something wonderful. Or, as my late grandmother used to say, when life gives you lemons, let the chickens loose and see what happens.